project manager, baby. Let me show you what I can do. It's the project manager blues, oh yeah. I've got to find something better to do.
In their flying machines, they go up to the up, they go down to the down. They enchant all the ladies and see all the scenes with their up to the up, and they're down to the down. Up and down, flying around, looping the loop and defying the ground. Up and down, they're frightfully keen, those magnificent men in their flying machines.
Well, hello and welcome to another episode of the Spirit of Mackenzie channel. My home-built seaplane, amphibious, that I intend to have flying this summer. See from the sticker that I am a member of the Seaplane Pilots Association, which is a North American-based organization, but they also have a branch in Australia, hence the hat. After I learned to fly in South Africa, I spent 2 weeks on vacation in Australia about 10 years ago. And I was up in an area of southern Queensland, just inland from the Sunshine Coast, staying in a town called Gympie, because nearby were these large lakes. And I took flying lessons in a Lake Buccaneer, training to be a seaplane pilot. In 3 days I did about 15 hours in the Lake Buccaneer, and I did over 100 landings and takeoffs, and I just loved it. And that's where I first got into my mind that I would be... Hi guys! The red studio light is on. Do not enter.
How's it going?
Good. Couple of hangar mates there and fellow pilots. The hazards of trying to film a video in a public space. Anyway, I was talking about learning to fly seaplanes in Australia, and after my episode training on the Lake Buccaneer, I went down to Sydney and I hooked up with a fellow with the Seaplane Pilots Association of Australia, who was so generous as to give me a flight in his Searey, the first Searey I'd ever seen, and he had built it himself, which just amazed me and started me on this journey. He took me up over Sydney Harbour. We just skimmed over the harbour bridge, which you're allowed to do in a seaplane there, and waved at the climbers, the people who had paid to climb up over the arches of the bridge. And we went past the Sydney Opera House, and then we did some landings and takeoffs just north of Sydney Harbour on the salt water. It was wonderful. Really liked it. So I tip my hat today to my colleagues and friends and associated other people in Australia. And as they do not say in Australia, put another shrimp on the Barbie mate. They do not say that.
That's a lovely accent you have. New Jersey?
Austria.
Austria? Well then, good day, mate. Let's put another shrimp on the Barbie.
Let's not.
Okay, so what's my task for today? Well, according to this list of things I must get done before I can get my airworthiness certificate, I'm going to be working on checking out the pitot being over there, pitot tube, and AOA system. The AOA probe is part of the pitot probe. Checking out the system, meaning the pitot and AOA probe, the tubing that runs from the wing down the pylon and to the control panel. Parts of the tubing hooks into the what's called the ADAHRS module of the Dynon flight management system. Part of it hooks into the airspeed indicator dial, and it also connects up or works in parallel with the static system, and the static ports are on either side of the hull, level with the dashboard. So that's what my task is to do today.
Singing in the rain, what a glorious feeling, I'm happy again.
The way this testing of the pitot, AOA, and static system is supposed to work is first off with the pitot tube. I can use a syringe to put pressure into the pitot tube port, and this simulates the movement of the airplane through the air. And that pressure should be transmitted through the pitot tubing all the way to the Dynon EFIS Adahars module, and also at the same time to the airspeed indicator gauge on the dashboard. And what it should show is it should show a speed. So on the old-fashioned gauge, the needle should move up to a certain speed. And not only should it indicate a speed, but it should stay there. As long as I don't release the pressure here, it should stay there. If it falls off, then that means there's a leak in the system and the pressure is being lost. Now, that you can lose the pressure at a very slow rate, that's acceptable within certain parameters. Now, I've done this already, and it wasn't a good result. I do get on both the Dynon EFIS and on the gauge on the dashboard, I do get an indication. So the pressure is reaching there. The tubing does exist, but the reading immediately falls off. The needle immediately falls to zero on the ASI gauge and on the EFIS, which indicates there's some sort of break in the system. So the next thing I did is I went right down to the ASI gauge itself and applied the pressure to the tubing going into the pitot side of the ASI. And sure enough, the needle went up and it held. So the break in the system is somewhere between the short length of tubing going into the ASI gauge itself and here. Most likely it's under the control panel, under the windscreen, under the deck. So, as is so typical on this whole build, 3 steps forward, 4 steps back. Which is not a good way to measure forward progress. So, well, I was going to have to take the windscreen and bow deck off anyway to secure all the wiring, and I didn't want to do that actually until I checked out the transponder in the radio, but I'm going to have to do it now. So, that's what I'm doing today. Now that I've got my windscreen installed, I'm really hoping I don't have to remove it from the deck. I think if I can just undo these screws, one on each side, from this metal arch, and then drill out these few rivets here, it should come off, and the windscreen should stay intact. Cross my fingers.
Those magnificent men in their flying machines, they go up to the up, they go down to the down, down. They enchant all the ladies and see all the scenes with their up to the up, and their down to the down, down. Up and down, flying around, looping the loop and defying the ground. Up and down, they're frightfully keen, those magnificent.
Well, that didn't work as cleanly as I wanted it to. I was hoping that this arch bar, aluminum tube, would come off with the windscreen, but it is secured to this piece underneath there. So I'm really going to have to drill out the rivets here. There's only a few of them, and then the windscreen will come off with the deck, but this bar will stay behind.
In their flying machines, they can fly upside down with their feet in the air. They don't think of danger, they really don't care. Newton would think he had made a mistake to see those young men and the chances they take.
Okay, now I got to reach underneath the control panel and unhook all the D-sub connectors and tubing from anything that's on the front of the panel.
Men in their flying machines, they go up to the up, they go down to the down, down. They enchant all the ladies and see all the scenes with their up to the up, and their down to the down, down.
Easy peasy, mate. So now I've got the pitot tubing all exposed here under behind the control panel underneath the hull deck. So to test the system now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my ASI, airspeed indicator gauge, out of the dashboard. So what I've done now is I've attached the ASI gauge back to the pitot tube marked with the P, and I've put a little syringe to put a little bit of pressure on that line. So put some pressure on, and that shows the speed the way it's supposed to. And I'm holding my thumb on here to stop it from leaking. I guess I could put a piece of tape on there. But later on, I'll check the rate that it actually does naturally leak. But this looks good. This means the gauge is okay. And this little piece of tube from the syringe to the gauge. So now I'll work my way back up the system. Let's try it from over here now. Nope, that's not good. Definitely something wrong from this side to that side. So I changed the elbow at this little connection here. Let's see if that makes a difference. Whoa! Well, it certainly did. Well, maybe that was a bad elbow. Yuck. Okay, well, that's one find. So now I've checked from the ASI gauge, which is okay, the tubing across this instrument avionics support channel. Found, I think, maybe a bad tubing quick disconnect, an L shape. When I changed it, things worked, so maybe it was bad. And there was also one piece of tubing in this area that had a less than 90-degree angle cut on the tubing. I've been very careful because it's been pointed out on many YouTube videos and in forum writings that you got to make sure you got a 90-degree cut on the end of your hose and you haven't squished the hose. So I recut that hose, and so I know everything's good up to this portion, the front of the canopy. The only connectors between here and the pitot tube are up there at the end of the wing. So I've pulled off this gap seal, which the antennae are mounted on, and now I'm going to check up in there on those connectors. Okay, so you watch the gauge. I hope you can see it between my legs. Here we go. That looks pretty good up here. Wow. So I think we're good up and to this side of the connector up here. Now I've gone all the way back to the pitot tube, almost to the tip of the probe, with my syringe. Instead of putting it on the end here, which because it's kind of conical, it's difficult to fit, I've just decided to insert it in here. I'm sure this pitot tube itself is leak-proof, intact, and won't be a problem. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a bit of pressure on here with the syringe and see how that affects the ASI gauge, sitting by its lonesome there in the middle of the cockpit. And then I'll, once I push the syringe in, I'll use this tape to kind of hold the syringe so it doesn't leak past, because the pressure tends to push the syringe out. Let's see how we do. So there we are with the syringe at the pitot tube end of the whole system, with a piece of masking tape to hold the syringe handle where it is so it doesn't depressurize. And perhaps you can see in the center of the cockpit is the ASI gauge, and it is reading at the 3 o'clock position and very slowly depressurizing. So I think that's good. Whatever problems there were in the system, there must have been another leak up at the wing connection. I changed one of the connectors, and I also cut one of the tube ends at a better 90 degree. So maybe that's okay. So now that I know that the pitot probe port and tubing works and is intact all the way to the ASI, I'm now going to check the AOA tubing. And the AOA port is on the angled surface under the pitot tube port, but I've just disconnected its tube up here. And what I've done is I've disconnected the AOA tubing from the Adahars unit, which feeds into the Dynon EFIS. I've disconnected there, and I hooked it into my ASI gauge. I just want to know that the tubing from here to there is intact. And so, because I don't have the EFIS display installed yet, the display I'm going to get as a false display basically on the ASI gauge. But at least tell me that everything's okay. So a little bit of pressure. You probably can't see it, but the ASI gauge mounted in the center of the cockpit there has gone up to whatever it is, 70 or 80 miles per hour, and is holding. Okay, so that means the AOA tubing is good from here under the deck. And then what I'll do as sort of a next phase, once I've done the static system tubing check, I'm going to put the deck back on, put the EFIS display in, and see the readings for the pitot tube and the AOA actually on the EFIS display. Now the static system uses a port on each side of the hull. One there, and one there. And I've placed tape over these to blank off the port for this testing. Because rather than put a pressure on, as we did with the pitot and the AOA, to test the static, you got to pull a vacuum against these closed off ports. So what I've done is hooked up the syringe again to the static system, which is cross-connected from this port to the other port, and goes into the back of the ASI gauge. So pulling a little vacuum here. Nope. There's a problem. You can see the needle went up, but then it quickly fell off, which means there's a leak somewhere. So what I'm going to have to do is, just as I did with the pitot system, I'm just going to have to go through step by step until I find where the leak is. So after an hour, 2 hours of work of going through the whole static tubing system, I've got it to work, i.e. it's sealed up. Things I had to change was the tape that was supposedly sealing the port. The electrician's tape I was using didn't seem to work, so I ended up using some black Gorilla tape. Right here where the static port comes to the inside of the hull, it's got kind of a thread on it that the plastic hose pushed over, and I had Teflon tape on it before. Well, that didn't seem to be enough, so I put more tape, actually some Gorilla tape in there, and then made sure I really screwed down these tube clamps to seal that. I had to change out a couple of these fittings, and I had to make sure the ends of some of the hose cuts were 90 degrees. And then I actually changed some of the routing of the hose in this area so it avoids the rudder pedals. And now, when you see I pull a little vacuum on the syringe, you can see the needle on the ASI is steady at whatever speed it's showing. Now the static system is used for a number of the instruments. For one, it's used on the ASI, the airspeed indicator, because it gives the static pressure compared to the dynamic pressure coming in from the pitot hose, and the difference gives you indication of your speed. Now the static tubing is also hooked into the ADAHRs for the Dynon EFIS system, and there it gives an indication of altitude, and it gives an indication of change of altitude, the VSI, vertical speed indicator. So I've got the pitot system checked out, I've got the AOA, angle of attack system, checked out, and the static system checked out, all using basically the ASI gauge as a test instrument. Now what I'm going to do is try to hook in the EFIS, the Dynon flight display. Hook that in and see if I can get all these signals also to register on it. Wish me luck, mate. So now the EFIS is temporarily in the dashboard, the display there on the left, and the airspeed indicating guide or gauge is hanging by duct tape under the right side of the dashboard. So let's simulate some speed and see if the speed indication in the upper left hand of the 6-pack on the display indicates a speed, and if the ASI gauge indicates the same speed. And I do that by putting some pressure on it, the pitot tube syringe. There we go, there's a little pressure. Release. Now I'm going to move to the static system and put a little vacuum on the syringe, which is now hooked into the static tubing right at the pilot's knee, and that should indicate a change in the altitude, the upper right dial of the 6-pack, and also the vertical speed in the bottom right of the 6-pack. So there's definitely an altitude, vertical speed. Yeah, I'd say that's looking reasonable. Okay, so I think I've done enough checkout that I can at least button things up and take this build completion to the next step. Ooh, that took a lot of time and effort. A lot of head scratching, and hopefully I managed to take a step forward overall.
That's all, folks.